In our previous ruminations, we were delighted by the promise of the discovery of who we are as humans, as it is revealed in the first pages of the wonderful Mesoamerican creation story of the Popul Vuh. We found ourselves there as the creature among all other creatures who can see into the heavens and speak with the intelligence of the gods. We saw how the ancient Mesoamerican peoples perceived language as the natural reflection of the heavenly movements that formed the marking of time in their calendar. The passage of sun and moon across the sky told a story, as did most especially the movements of Venus the morning star, the herald of sunrise, and its disappearance from the morning sky into the underworld, signifying the adventures and trials of the hero twins to resurrect their father, the corn god. The reason for the creation was the creation of humanity, a creature who could perceive the divinity behind creation, and so praise the gods. Humanity does so by the divine gift of speech. Language and writing in their pictographic language was the same as drawing. The sounds of words are represented by figures of the things named. And since everything that exists in the earth reflects the heavenly movements, so the names of all things reflect this cosmic order. And finally, we noticed that the totem animals and gods that mark calendrical cycles in the Mesoamerican scheme, the names that appear in calendar scrolls and wall murals and carvings, often appear on the heads of priests officiating at ceremonies connected to the calendar. These masks and ceremonial headdresses summon the gods into the priests. And here we made a strange observation. This is not a scholarly opinion, just my own observation, that the towering masks seem to swallow the human features of the face. This seems a bit odd and out of place, if what distinguishes humanity, what makes one human, is the ability to perceive divinity. This should make one more human, should enhance human feature, not obscure it. And I wonder if this is a sign of a darker side of Mesoamerican culture and the spiritual danger that we see in many shamanistic cults. By summoning the totem animal that represents the god, by becoming the animal, descending into the animal sensations and instincts, there is a belief that somehow one becomes more human, even though the animals themselves are less than human according to the creation story itself. That there could be a brotherhood between humanity and the other creatures, between humanity and even those objects and forces that we consider inanimate. The ancients did not see things that way. They perceived mountains, rivers, rocks, and trees as living and animated in their own manner. This is perhaps a return to the primordial order of the universe and of universal innocence. And Native Americans had that perception of the brotherhood of all things. This is one thing, but to enter the perception, sensation, and passion of the animals is an act of magic summoning and a loss of human potential. At the same time, to become possessed by the god so that the shaman enters a trance-like state and loses awareness of himself, is swallowed by the god. Is this really the height of human endeavor and wisdom? Or is it something more pernicious? Especially when one has gods that demand human sacrifice, gods hungry to devour human hearts, as so vividly depicted in wall murals and carvings and scrolls, where we see jaguars, dogs, and other animals feeding on human hearts. One wonders, if this is a profound misunderstanding of the kind of sacrificial life that enhances human existence. Inviting the God into the man as a function of the priesthood, this is what we've been looking for in our ruminations, invoking the divine. How does one invoke the divine so as to exalt human understanding and lift personal understanding into the divine, to stimulate and awaken the noetic faculty of our intelligence? We know that this is what some of these people were doing. We get the idea that the Toltec ruler Tepoltzin, often identified as Quetzalcoatl, and the Aztec philosopher ruler Nezhualcoyotl were truly men blessed with unusual wisdom, and they were poets and philosophers. And many of the Aztec philosophers seem to have been like them. They were known as Tlamantinime, the knowers of things. It is human nature to invoke the divine in this way. There is a ritual element to the dance throughout Native American culture to enact the stories of the gods and so invoke them and their aid. The dancer temporarily becomes the god while acting that part through the dance. But so often in pre-Christian practice, there is a shamanistic quality that is displayed where a person goes into a trance and becomes possessed by the god or spirit, and the spirit speaks through them. The person is just a medium, often unconscious. The word demon is derived from deity. A demon is a god, often a particular god among many such gods. And this is demon possession. And it's spiritually very dangerous. And it's a common problem among many pre-Christian cults and practices. And among neo-pagans, it's even worse. So to what degree is invocation natural and healthy? And to what degree is it dangerous? This is a matter of spiritual discernment, as the fathers of the Philokalia point out, and it requires great purity, humility, and hard-won wisdom that very few have. In our contemporary world, which is so materialistic and generally agnostic, it's become accepted that it's good to be spiritual. Spiritual, but not religious. You hear this a lot. As though anything spiritual is good. That spirituality shows a more evolved human experience. And this platitude, forgive me for saying it that way, holds as though it's a self-evident truth until some scare or tragedy reminds us that there are actually deadly dangers in the spiritual world, that not every spirit is benevolent, and that we don't really know that much about the spiritual world anymore, and we certainly don't know our way around in it. We have a fascination with shamans of all sorts. We also maintain a fascination with horror stories. How any traditional society approaches shamanism, it's probably safe to say that it's something that we don't understand unless we're part of that culture, and maybe not then either. It's possibly something that our ancestors didn't really understand. About the only fact that the fathers of the Philokalia can guarantee is that if a spiritually inclined person is proud, haughty, in any way immoral, that is not a good spirit. Pride is always the mark of evil. And if he is truly humble and filled with a spirit of love, he's probably a servant of the truth. So now I want to bring up a phenomena known throughout Mesoamerica and in American Southwest native lore too, the phenomena of the Nagual. This is linked to the fact that a person is born on such and such a day, often named for that day or for a particular quality, and the totem animal or god of that day or that quality becomes a helper and a protector. This is the Nagawal. It's a connection to the natural world in which one is born, and this connection to the earth is simply a part of Native American culture. The relationship with animals is one of those things about this culture that I think we have to admit we don't really understand and respect it. But sometimes it's believed that the person actually can become the Nagawal, even spiritually and physically morph into the coyote or jaguar or monkey, and believe this somehow makes them more human. They become a shapeshifter. And yet at the same time, in most cultures, the shapeshifter is generally feared. In Mesoamerican cultures, such people are called sorcerers and regarded as evil. The Navajo call them skinwalkers and speak with terror of the kind of sacrifice necessary to become one of these. And when you look at the scale of human sacrifice practiced among the Aztecs and consider how long these sacrifices were central to Mesoamerican culture, it really looks like there's something very dark at work in these cultures, especially these gods demanding large quantities of human victims who supposedly told their priests that without human blood, the cosmos would cease to exist, that the gods cannot live without human blood to feed them. And by the end of the Popul Vuh, it really looks like the gods have become something other than vast intelligent forces shaping the cosmos. Because in the narrative, the Quiche Maya were given their own gods, bestowed on them from the ancient city, and these gods were carried in backpacks, in the sacred bundle, if you will. But they turned to stone in the first sunrise that came over the world. They still taught to the people whenever they were anointed with the blood of youths, and then they appeared as youths themselves, bathing in a river. So they are now idols, oracles of doom and sacrifice, and the nature of sacrifice seems to have changed, because this brings up the theme of the domination of other peoples and human sacrifice. And the narrative concentrates at this point on the ascendancy of Quiche power over the other Maya people. And this is what I feel is the darker side of Mesoamerican culture. The widespread sacrifices of the Aztecs shocked and horrified the conquistadors, who were brutal warriors, but also they were innately religious Catholics. Now, they may not have been ideal Christians, certainly they weren't, but they were not prepared for what they found in the Aztec temples. The Aztecs ruled their Mesoamerican empire of many different languages and cultures, and they ruled with an iron hand. They developed a warrior culture that demanded constant large numbers of sacrificial victims. And this they inherited from the earlier Maya and Mesoamerican cultures. They had beautiful temples, but inside they were coated with layers of blackened, putrefied gore from sacrificial victims that were sacrificed alive, tearing their hearts out while they still beat. This is a fact. It's not myth. After that, the head was cut off and rolled down the steep temple steps, and the head was staked among stacks of skull walls decorating the public plaza. Then the body was thrown down the steps afterwards. If it was an important victim, the skin was peeled off and made into a priestly garment. The priesthood at this time was largely maintained by a warrior class, and this was the same in the older Toltec culture and also in the Maya. In Tenochtitlan, the Aztec capital, wars were fought with frequency, and they were fought not to kill, but to obtain sacrificial victims for their gods, for their main god, Huitzilopochtli, the hummingbird war god. And these ritual wars were called flower wars. They were fought according to certain conventions and rituals, almost like games. And the sacrificial cults connected to warfare and to the ball games. The ball courts were always next to the temple, and part of the ritual of the ball game was sacrificing the loser to the god. Human sacrifice was common in Mesoamerica, but not all practiced it to this degree. And there were some, always some, not many, but there were always some who opposed it. The legend is that the warrior class gods came to prominence in the old culture of the Toltecs, but it was opposed by the prince Topiltzin, often identified as Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent god. He was a patron of art and agriculture, and this particular ruler believed that human sacrifice was an abomination and not the kind of sacrifice the gods desired. He was vocal about this. He tried to change the culture. He tried to abolish human sacrifice, but instead he was driven out of the city by the warriors. One of the founding cities of the Aztec Empire was Texcoco, and its most famous prince was Nezahualcóyotl, the philosopher and poet, and the brilliant engineer of the dike system that separated the salt and fresh water of Lake Texcoco. He also built the aqueduct into the island city of Tenochtitlan, and he built the magnificent library of Texcoco, and also a complex of garden temples on a hill of springs near his city. And he, too, was horrified by the increase of human sacrifice among the Aztecs, and he also tried to stop it, and he also was not successful. But we see the lore of opposition to human sacrifice runs throughout Native American legend. It's part of the legend of Chaco Canyon also, according to the Navajo. So this brings us to a serious discussion on the nature of sacrifice. And in spite of all the mistakes, failures, and absolute abuses done in the name of the conquistadors to impose their Roman Catholic religion upon the Native Americans, there were a sincere few who really tried to live a sacrificial Christian life and desired to bring these peoples into their understanding of faith. The 12 Franciscans brought from Spain by Cortez, known as the 12 Apostles of Mexico, were a completely different breed of men from the conquistadors. They were not like all missionaries to the New World, some of whom were like conquistadors themselves. In fact, these 12 were a minority. They were truly idealistic followers of Francis of Assisi who really believed it was possible that the people of this new world could be brought into the apostolic life of the early church according to the Franciscan model, which they believed could approach the state of paradise. So this was a utopian vision that they actually believed in, and they recognized something good in the aspirations of the Aztec philosophers, the teachers of Nezahualcóyotl schools, the Tlamentine, the knowers of things, who aspired to wisdom and had a sense of the kind of sacrificial life the Franciscans wanted to convey. To sacrifice one's self to the sacramental act of the liturgical Eucharist, to offer up one's self for communion with God, while offering up the bread and wine for something that only God can do, to make it into his body and his blood that he sacrificed for the life of the world, and doing this only because he commanded that it be done, this anaphora, the offering up, is an image of the sacrificial life. If we offer up everything we do and everything we are to God, this is the sacrificial life. This is the life that Christ taught and the life that he showed in his person. And this understanding of sacramental existence, the native Mexicans liked and still do. They embraced it. They may not have liked many things the conquistadors did, but they did like this. And they really did like the way the Franciscans actually tried to live a sacrificial life, trying to bring people into this understanding. Because the 12 Franciscans really put themselves into it. Toribio de Benavente was one of their favorites. Motolinia was the name given to him, to one of them, and that means one who is afflicted and poor because of his ragged robes worn out like him by his labors. His humility and his Franciscan poverty won them over. And these 12 built the first university of the Americas, even before the ruins of Tenochtitlan were cleared from conquest, because Cortés had to completely destroy this beautiful city in order to take it. The inspiration for this Colegio de Santa Cruz was to be a seminary for native priests. This dream of the Franciscans was never supported by the church hierarchy and didn't come to pass. But the most promising sons of the native intellectuals were educated here, and it produced a mestizo culture that endured and prospered. Mestizo is the mixture of native and Spanish cultures. The college published not only the works of the Franciscan teachers and ethnologists, and foremost among these is Bernardino de Sahagun's 12-volume history of native culture that we call the Florentine Codex, the most complete account we have of pre-conquest native culture, including calendars, festivals, the gods, native history and philosophy, and a very advanced understanding of native horticulture and medicine. It was a serious attempt to understand the people in order to give them the Franciscan approach to sanctification. But it also published important works by native graduates, some of which continued the tradition of Aztec scrolls and gave us the best sources we have of Aztec history from the brushes of those who actually witnessed the conquest. Because writing and painting were the same thing to the Aztecs, it was a very important center of painting as well that established the mestizo style of Mexican-Spanish painting. And there were other examples of Spaniards who defended the natives and their culture. The Dominican friar Bartolomé de las Casas was among the first conquistadors in the islands of Hispaniola, Cuba and the Dominican Republic, right after the time of Columbus. He saw firsthand how the original Idaho natives were tortured and abused into slavery and pretty much wiped out. And he participated in this abuse, but his conscience could not endure it. And so he spent the rest of his life as a friar advocating for them, recording the abuse, speaking against the systematic enslaving of the people as a labor force, and he even went back to Spain to complain before the king. Francisco de Aguilar was a commander in Cortés's army, and he was given an estate, but he renounced it and spent the last 40 years of his life as a Dominican friar teaching the people. These are two rare examples of conquistadors who bitterly regretted their violence and really tried to do something about it, giving their whole lives back to this people and to God. And I also want to mention Martin de Valencia, who is the leader of the 12 original Franciscans. And while in Mexico, he retired from his missionary labors to give himself over to contemplation. And it's too bad that he didn't have access to the writings of the Greek Hesychus, because this was clearly his inclination. But to the degree that Francis of Assisi grasped those mysteries, this effort by the Franciscans to understand and appreciate native culture in order to speak to it more clearly was eventually shut down by the Inquisition, and so unfortunately this tendency did not prevail. And yet the ideal did remain, and this was the motivation for Friar Jimenez to copy and translate the Popul Vuh in 1703. But by far the most outstanding evidence of the success of people like this, of the few pious efforts that were made, was the appearance of the Mother of God in 1531 to the peasant Juan Diego, and her promise to always be protector of the poor and needy, and her assurance that they could rely on her as their mother and powerful intercessor. When Juan Diego relayed his vision to the Dominican friar, Bishop Juan de Zumarraga, and even though this bishop was always sympathetic to the natives, he didn't believe this vision. And so in her second appearance, she told Juan Diego to take him the yellow Castilian roses that she placed in his cloak, blooming out of season in a foreign land on the hill of Tepeyac, where she appeared. And when Juan Diego opened his cloak in front of Bishop Juan de Zumarraga, and the roses fell out, and there on the inside of his peasant's cloak was the painting of the Guadalupe Virgin with iconographic elements of mixed Spanish and native painting styles. This changed his mind, and it has changed the minds of so many since that day. This is just an introduction to a very complex topic, and I admitted at the beginning that there will always be things of other cultures that one will probably not completely understand. And I want to make it clear that I'm not an expert on this or any other topic that I open for discussion. These are just my own ruminations, often the result of research on novels that I'm writing. But it seems to me that the principle of human sacrifice became greatly misunderstood, and its meaning was twisted into causes for war and domination. If the purpose of humanity is praise of the gods in the language of the gods, this requires a different kind of sacrifice where men, like gods, have a power of speech to which the intelligent universe responds, like the poetry of Nezahualcóyotl. Language penetrating into the unseen essence of reality, interacting with the primordial formation in a way that makes men noble, gives them genius with fiery splendor in their very being. This is the language of the Popul Vuh. But the nature of language grew corrupt, invoking these bloodthirsty gods. The whole mind of the priesthood became attached to certain spiritual presences that were invited into the idols. And it seems to me to be the meaning of the latter parts of the Popul Vuh. These rituals became detached from the primordial splendor, especially those performed for those gods who were addicted to blood and death, claiming that this was the purpose for life. They came and sat in the temple, thirsting for blood, and taught the people to invoke them with war and sacrifice, and the people fed them with their own thinking hearts, the very seat of their being. It just seems clear to me that these were none other than the lords of death from the underworld, parading as gods. Well, whatever the Maya people still think of all this, it seems to me that those who still admire the idea of human sacrifice and the powers of those kinds of gods are those who are most opposed to Christianity in general, and those who accuse the Christian faith of every evil and abuse against the native people. And many of these accusations are just. And yet, one of the most astonishing phenomena among the Maya people today is the increasing numbers in many thousands who are embracing the Orthodox faith in Guatemala and southern Mexico. This is an immense movement, and they're finding themselves perfectly at home and quite happy in it. And it's giving the Orthodox faith a unique ethnic identity, as it did in Russia, in Serbia, or in Africa. And it's only fair to mention that Father Andre Gihan, who was the leader of this movement at the turn of the 21st century, always expressed his gratitude for his Catholic upbringing in preparing him and his people to receive the Orthodox faith.